Jean Mahoney, and I'm Beacon's Community Resource Manager. I want to really thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to be relaunching this program. It started late last year. I also started late last year, so it's been on the back burner while we worked on the walk and the other programs. But it's a really important program. Raising awareness about bladder cancer is critical, so I really appreciate you being here today. As I said, I'm going to pause periodically for questions, and I'll open my control panel, Charlotte, to see if you have any questions. If you have a question I can't answer today, I will find out the answer and get back to you. So one way or another, we'll get everything answered. So just as an intro, talk a little bit about the purpose of this program. When newly diagnosed bladder cancer patients call Beacon, they often say that the bladder cancer came out of the blue. These are some comments that we've gotten from bladder cancer patients who are also volunteers. And similarly, at health and wellness fairs, it's common for visitors to say they've never heard of bladder cancer. This is particularly troubling, though, because we know that bladder cancer is not a rare or unusual disease. It's the 5th most common bladder cancer in the United States. There's 500,000 bladder cancer survivors living in the country now. Each year, 75,000 people will get diagnosed, and unfortunately, 16,000 of those people, or of people who are diagnosed, will die. It's also a very expensive disease because the recurrence rate is so high. People have to go back to their doctors quite a long time after they're originally diagnosed. So it's almost $4 billion a year. But the lack of awareness about this disease has serious consequences. In spite of its prevalence, it's underfunded, and there have been no major treatment advances in 30 years. So Beacon is working to change that. The Bladder Cancer Advocacy Network is a community of advocates, survivors, and medical and research professionals, all united in support of people who have been touched by bladder cancer. Since 2005, when we were founded, Beacon has been working to advance bladder cancer research, provide information and support, and to raise awareness about bladder cancer, which of course is where you come in. It's in this environment with these really alarming statistics and very troubling statistics that Beacon founded the Speakers Bureau. And as a Speakers Bureau volunteer, you'll be doing the essential work of raising awareness about bladder cancer. Speakers Bureau volunteers with each conversation you have, each time you share your story, each presentation you give, you're raising awareness and empowering people in your community by giving the information they need to recognize bladder cancer and to take action. So this is a real priority for Beacon, and it's critical work. I'm going to talk about what we'll be covering today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Speakers Bureau, just give you the broad outlines of the program. We'll talk about how you go about finding and preparing to be a Speakers Bureau volunteer to find engagement or outreach opportunities. Talk about how, give you some tools, I would say, to answer questions about bladder cancer. We'll cover each of the 3 different types of volunteers for the program, and even you can choose which type you want to be, but there's some information in each section that will be useful to you regardless of what you do. We'll wrap up with do's and don'ts, just a summary of things to focus on or not focus on, as the case may be, and then we'll talk quickly about next steps. So as I said, I'm going to try and keep things moving because I know that I have a lot of material, but I am going to pause at the end of each section and check for questions. So that's what I'm doing now. Anybody, any questions?
Yes.
Oh, you do? Okay, go ahead.
This is Neil. I have heard the cost of bladder cancer expressed 2 different ways. One is that it's the most expensive urological cancer to treat, and the other, which I've heard more commonly, is that it's the most expensive cancer to treat. Do you know which of those statements is correct?
I actually don't know the difference, so I'll have to write that down and find out the answer to that. So
Okay,
I know it costs almost $3 billion a year, almost $4 billion, sorry. But,
And you said it's fifth most common cancer. I think my understanding was it's fourth most common in men and sixth most in women.
It's actually 11th in women and 4th in men, based on the most recent statistics I've heard of.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with the question box right now. Let's see. Let me try one more time. Okay. I'm sorry, I will come back to that. All right, so moving on, I'm going to talk about the Speakers Bureau. And I'll tell you, when I first started last year, when I heard the name of this program, first person I thought of was this guy. And I know he does a lot of things. But the reason I thought of him is I know that he speaks to large crowds regularly. And some of you may be looking and thinking, you know, good, that's a great image. That's just what I need. I can't wait to get out there. While others of you might think Beacon is crazy. You know, I'm never going to like speaking to a crowd. But the good news about this, whether you love him or hate him, or whether you like this image or not, is that with the Speakers Bureau, which is open to anyone, there's a way to participate regardless of your feelings about public speaking. There's 3 different types of opportunities. The community connectors go to health fairs and interact with people one-on-one, so it's more like a conversation. Sharing your story, these volunteers, in this case, they would be someone whose life has been touched in some way by bladder cancer. Either they're a survivor or the spouse of a survivor, a co-survivor, a family member, a caregiver, someone who's actually had some experience with bladder cancer, tell their personal story as a way of making a human connection. And then finally, community educators who, again, could be survivors or they might not be. Either way is fine. So a little bit about what you'd be doing in each level, starting with community connectors. Your volunteers who would be attending a health or wellness fair or other similar event in your community to raise awareness about bladder cancer. And we'll provide the tools, things to lure people in, like a raffle gift, or suggestions for games, along with the educational materials. Also, at these events, people are often shy, so you have to be inviting and welcome them in and find a way to engage with them. Listen to their questions and then provide a response. And of course, Beacon will help with that. The next type of volunteers we're talking about sharing your story. And so it's really valuable to hear expert information. That's not really what we're looking for here. It's more the value that comes when you can make another person relate to you by listening to your story. You can touch them on a human level. So it's not so much having all the facts and figures, though of course you will. It's more making them see that this disease, which they've never heard of, can happen to them, or it can happen to someone they love. So this is sort of a really important part of the program, that being able to reach people in a way where other types of information fail. And then finally, there's the community educators, and this is also a speaking opportunity, and this is our volunteer, David Langham. So you can tell your story as part of the presentation. It's really a more formal presentation provided by Beacon. It's more likely to be presented at a formal meeting, a civic group or club or something like that. So Beacon will provide it, and you can personalize it and its way of providing education about bladder cancer. Okay, so just to sum up, that's a very brief overview of the program. Beacon's responsibilities and our commitment to you is to make you feel welcome. We have a tiny staff, but a very large volunteer corps. We always need more, and we want to make sure that you feel welcome, because we really need you, and you're doing really important work. We'll provide training initially, of course, and then ongoing. We'll recognize your contributions. We'll respond to your questions and concerns, and I really want to stress that your feedback is going to be essential to making this an effective program, because you're on the front line and we'll need to hear from you and what you need from us. And of course, we'll provide all educational and outreach resources, and we'll go into that a little bit more later on. As a volunteer, you'll represent Beacon in your community, or you'll be a Beacon representative. So when you're volunteering, you're also a member of Beacon. So we just want you to put your best foot forward. Make a time commitment, though I'll say it's not a huge one. We're asking you to go to 2 to 4 events over the course of a year. So it's not a huge commitment. You can do one every 6 months or whatever works for you. And we ask you to communicate with us, to let us know when you found an engagement, to take pictures, to let us know how it went, and to give us feedback about what you need. Okay, I'm going to pause. I'm sorry I had trouble accessing the questions, but I'll pause and see if anybody has any questions. No? I'm going to see if I can. I see, Charlotte, that you have your hand up.
Can you hear me now?
I can. Oh, good. Yeah.
It was a matter of plugging back in something I forgot. Okay.
Okay. All right, great. And Trish, are you, everything okay?
Everything's fine, and I do have a question.
Okay, good.
Tell me, like, how many of the fairs have people participated in? What's their concerns when they do go to the health fairs and so forth, and how do they find out the information?
You mean how do you find out where there is a health fair? Or?
Yes.
Okay, that's perfect timing because we're actually getting to that next.
Okay.
So I will go through that section and then I'll see if I've answered your question.
Okay.
Okay. So we're getting to Krisha's question, and this is a bird's eye view of a town. In this case, it's Northfield, Minnesota, but it could be your town too. So Beacon, if we know about an opportunity for an outreach event, we will absolutely let you know. But you are really the expert in your own community. You know it better than we do. So we want to encourage you, and actually the first step is to find opportunities for engagement. So in your town or community, you probably have a college, a university close by. It could be a medical education institution. So there's plenty of opportunities at teaching colleges and at universities for both health fairs where you can meet your students, as well as for speaking opportunities. Maybe you could speak to a class or something like that. Mm-hmm. Also, of course, your hospital, your local hospital, many opportunities for both types of outreach. Churches, community and civic groups, and this could be anything from like a book club to the Rotary. And many churches, I know that we've gotten a lot of calls from local churches who are doing health fairs now. So this is another area for you to explore. Businesses, whether it's a branch of a large corporation or a local business, they often have health fairs for their employees. And then one final suggestion, and that's one that's often overlooked, is an adult community, especially an active adult community. They're often looking at bringing in speakers, or they may be looking to put on a health fair, and certainly Beacon has something to offer there. So that's a sort of a broad selection of places where we suggest you look, but also there's some more general tips. So when you're searching for engagement opportunities, think about your own network. I mean, talk to your friends. Is there something going on where they work? Do they belong to a club? Do they know something about something going on in the local hospital or something like that? So just among your friends, there's probably a lot of people who have suggestions. And remember, depending on what you do, it doesn't have to be a huge crowd. We're just looking to reach people. As I said, Beacon will help you out. If we find something in your area, if we know something, we will absolutely let you know. And then the final suggestion, and this originally was Google, but there's lots of ways to know what's going on in your community. When you start looking around, looking at the community pages of the newspaper and so forth, you'll find different opportunities. So I hope, Krisha, that answered your question?
That definitely does.
Okay. So there's more about this in the handbook, and I may have not mentioned the handbook, but you will be receiving this after our talk today. It's your volunteer handbook, and it goes into this in quite a bit of detail. So it'll back up what I'm saying here. So when you hear me say handbook, I know you don't have it yet, but you're going to have it as soon as the presentation's over. So that's another resource for you.
That's great, so I can stop writing.
Sorry. Yes, it's quite long. So, I mean, but feel free to take notes, though. So once you find an engagement opportunity, then it's a matter of being prepared. Here are some suggestions for things for you to ask about, just some general ones. They're also in your handbook. So you want to know the general who, what, where, when, how, and why, the logistical information, where you need to be and when, and sometimes there's instructions about parking and so forth. So just so you have all of that down and understand it. You might want to ask if it's an indoor and outdoor event, especially if you're a community connector and you're bringing volunteers with you, because you'll want to know, do I need a raincoat or an umbrella or sunscreen? Anything that you'll need if you have a volunteer coming, they'll need as well. How many people are expected to attend? If they know this, that is something that we would need to know so we can send you the right amount of materials. And who is the intended audience? And depending on the type of volunteer you are, this could be this is a really important question to ask. So Beacon might need to know because, so if it's a survivor event, we'll send survivor pins. And if it's a health and wellness fair, we probably wouldn't. We'd send other materials. But it will also help you plan to engage with your audience, whether you're a speaker or whether you're going to be talking to people one-on-one. So this is sort of an important question. Ask if the organizers need anything from us. Do we need to sign anything? Do they need a copy of our logo? Each event is different. You'll need to know the setup and community connectors. That might be questions about chairs and tables and what you can bring. And speakers, on the other hand, might want to know where they're speaking. Do they have a microphone? Will they be sitting up? You know, is there a place for a PowerPoint? That sort of thing. Also, if you can get this information about what the dress code is. And though business casual is a good suggestion for many events, you wouldn't want to wear a suit to a picnic, for instance. So if you find out what type of event it is and what people will be wearing, that will help you fit in and people will see you and relate to you. Okay, a little bit more about preparation, and this is divided by the type of volunteer. So community connectors might want to know, in addition to the questions we've gone over, what is the table staffing policy? So for instance, will they bring you lunch, or do you have to go and get your own? And if you go and get your own lunch, do you have to have someone on hand to staff the table? So those are some questions that you'll need to discuss with the organizers. And for speakers, you would want to know what the time limit is so you can, practice your speech and tailor it so it fits in the time limit. You'll want to know, is it a format where you can answer questions? Will the audience be able to ask you questions? And can you bring Beacon materials? So finding and getting prepared. All right, I'm just going to sum up this section. So you've gotten together some volunteers and you're going to the health fair at your church, or you're going to be speaking at the Rotary. Just a few things. Just know the logistical details, know everything about where the event is and what you need to know, how to get there, who your contact is. Make sure you understand your audience. That's critical. review Beacon's educational materials, and we'll go over that in a bit. And please call us and let us know so we can send you the materials you need and also follow up with you afterwards. But just keep us in the loop so we can make sure you have the stuff you need. And I'm going to pause and see, are there any questions before we move on to the next section? Okay, all right. Now we're going to talk about answering questions. And I thought I'd start this section with someone who definitely is an expert. You see him as an expert. And no matter how you participate in this program, one thing you'll need to do is answer questions. But it's key to remember, you absolutely do not need to be an expert in bladder cancer, and you don't have to have all the answers. So these are some volunteers in various Beacon programs, and they bring a great value to all of the things they do, but the Speakers Bureau as well, because there's, and especially people who've been personally impacted by bladder cancer, have a way to relate to people and tell their story in a way that maybe they can reach people and an expert who might seem more remote could not. So you have real value in that you can relate and share your personal experience and make people see that what you experience could happen to them. It's a common disease, and people need to know that, and you have the power to get that message across. Now, of course, you're not an expert, and we don't expect you to be, but we will provide you a lot of materials to help you bone up on the basics of bladder cancer. Bladder Cancer 101, which is the presentation that community educators give. I've made a recording of it, so we're not going to cover it today. I'm going to send it to you so you can watch it on your own time. Even if you're not a community educator, it's useful. It's useful information. I'm going to send you a copy of the Bladder Cancer Basics Handbook. There's some for you to distribute, but then there's one for you, and it sort of covers all aspects of bladder cancer to diagnosis, from diagnosis to aftercare. So that's a useful resource for you, and one that you can bring with you to events. There's tip sheets and webinars, and in your volunteer handbook, you will receive a list of all the resources, educational resources we have with links, and of course, what I keep talking about, your handbook, which also has your frequently asked questions and talking points. So though I want to stress you don't need to be an expert, we're also not going to just send you out there on your own. There's a lot of resources to help you talk knowledgeably about bladder cancer. And I just want to close, add one final thought. Even though we just are not, Beacon is not a medical organization, so we ask that you, even if you have a medical background, when you're acting as a Beacon volunteer, please don't give medical advice or give referrals to specific doctors, because we're not equipped to do that. But just know that we do have resources that will, obviously help people understand bladder cancer or help them even choose a doctor. So even though we ask you not to give that specific advice, you do have resources on hand that you can share with people. So, talk a final bit about questions. And this is in your handbook. We recommend the LARA method. So to listen carefully, to reiterate what you hear to make sure you understood, to respond, and then to add your own personal insights and experience, because you can often reach people that way in a way you couldn't if you just stuck to their facts. Again, I won't go into too much detail, but please refer to Beacon's educational materials that we just discussed. Always, if someone like Neil asked me a question that I did not know, and I wish I knew it, but I didn't, so I just told him I don't know. I'll find out, though, Neil. But don't be afraid to say you don't know. You can refer people to Beacon's website, or you can take their name and send it to me, and I will find an answer to their question. And this is important when you're talking about your personal story. It's important that you feel comfortable and setting boundaries. I mean, even though you're sharing a very personal experience, that doesn't mean that anything goes. There are certain things you may not feel comfortable talking about, and it's fine to not answer a question that you feel is asking too much of you. You can say, I don't feel comfortable answering that, but you can refer them to us and we'll try and get them information that answers their question. Okay, so we've finished sort of the general question and answer section. I'm moving into the specifics of each type of volunteer program, but I want to pause first and see if anybody has questions. Okay, so community connectors, just a little bit more in-depth overview. When you're going to an event or a health or wellness fair, it's fine to recruit someone to bring with you. You'll need to make sure they fill out the volunteer application, and I can get that to you. And we're also happy to help if they have any questions or if they need any support from us. But recruiting volunteers to help you is fine. And in fact, we appreciate it because it just broadens the circle of people who understand about bladder cancer and can raise awareness. You'll find, I think, unless you go to very unusual health fairs, that people are often shy at these events, or they might just sort of scoot on by or refuse to make eye contact, or and you can't obviously go up and grab them, but being inviting like these volunteers are, and making eye contact and thinking of ways to engage people is sort of an important skill. And this volunteer, if you can, if it's set up, you might stand out in front of the table so you can engage people more easily. Think about, you might have an intro question that's not too frightening that you can ask them. It's just, you'll see after you, and you may have done this already if you've attended health fairs, you may see that people have different ways of not engaging, and it's our purpose as community connector volunteers to figure out a way to speak with them. And most people, I found, if you just say hello and ask a friendly question, they will be willing to talk to you, but you do need to make that extra effort and come up with some strategies. And we've shown people standing out in front of the table and so forth. And I know that some of these things can go on for a while, so don't feel you have to stand all day. But these are two volunteers, Gary and Lorraine, who are very welcoming and inviting in spite of the fact they're sitting down. So don't feel, oh, my feet are killing me, but I got to keep standing. You don't. You just need to figure out how to engage people and focus outward. Beacon is going to provide the materials that you need. And as we discussed earlier, and it's up to you to set up the table in a way that you think is inviting. So this person was very creative, and this is a pretty fancy table. It even has snacks and things to drink. This is a little bit simpler, but it still looks nice. I guess the key is it's up to you. You don't want to just sort of dump it on the table because people will probably just walk on by. You want to display it so people are drawn in and want to look at it. Another way of drawing people in is by having a raffle. And even though you have critical and possibly life-saving information to share, sometimes that isn't enough to make people stop and talk to you. But if you can raffle something off, and obviously Beacon will provide the prize, this is one way of engaging people. And also, it's a way of getting their contact information, because to enter the raffle, they have to fill out their contact information, and that's really valuable to Beacon. This is a way of drawing more people in. Another thing is to engage people through games and quizzes, and these volunteers are playing the Beacon golf game with a visitor to their booth, and we'll provide the questions and answers. So if you happen to have a putter, you can play this game, or you can, some volunteers have found they can, the kids can play the game and they can talk to the parents. The other thing is, don't feel that you need a golf balls and a putter and so forth. You can use the cards to come up with your own game, like a quiz show game, and you can give people an orange bracelet for playing. So the golf game is something we've come up with, and we will send it to you, but really it's just a starter to get you thinking about how to engage people. Okay. And in your outreach kit, these are the basic supplies you'll get. Once you contact us and tell us about the event, we can customize it. But every time we mail you a package, you'll be receiving at least these. And I'll send you samples as well so you can see what they look like. Okay, so that's community connectors. And of course, in your handbook, there's more detail. But now I want to move on to the storytelling section, the sharing your story.
Jean,
and we want to, yeah, go ahead.
Can I stop and ask a question? It's Krisha.
Sure. Yeah.
What if there's, you said that BCAN would cover cost like of a raffle or whatever. What about the cost for the booth? A lot of times at fairs and stuff, they'll have a $50 charge or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a charge, contact me. I have to run it by Monica, but definitely we would cover that. I just have to get approval from Monica. But yeah, you don't have to pay for that or anything.
Okay.
Okay, I'll stop here and see. Are there any other questions?
Jean,
Yeah.
this is Charlotte. What about those vertical posters, signs? How do we do something like that?
I was a little hesitant about that picture because I don't think we're passing out those signs.
I didn't think so.
That's another Monica question. But we will provide you with a smaller sign. But those big ones, I don't think we are passing them out, and I don't even know how we'd mail some of them. But
what if we had the resources to have one printed? Would you provide the graphics?
Oh, I'm sure we would do that, and I will make a note to talk to Monica about the big signs and getting them printed and what she thinks about that. Okay.
Okay.
All right, I'll make it a note. Okay, so I will ask about the printing the big signs because they are impactful, I will say. Any other questions? Okay, so we'll talk about sharing your story, focusing first on the audience. And the reason is the goal of this program is to not only let people know that bladder cancer exists, but that it's something that can happen to them. But you have to be careful in the way that you tell this story, or if you tell your story. I'm going to start with an example of a movie I've never seen, Castaway, but I understand the main character got stranded on a desert island and had to find his way home. And this is an awful story, but it's entertaining because people think this would never happen to me. You don't want your story to be so unique that people think that about you. They think, this is like a Hollywood movie. I feel for the person, but this will not happen to me. You want them to know that what happened to you could happen to them. So one thing is to make sure people can relate to you and not sort of push this off into some Hollywood world where they'll not be impacted. And that's sort of related to the next point. The way you tell your story, I have not experienced bladder cancer, but I've heard some of those stories from people who have, and I know that there are parts of it that can be very upsetting, that can be very graphic. You want to be careful about how you tell this because people will go into denial and stick their head into the sand. You want the audience, and in our earlier slides there was a picture of people watching David speak, and they were very intent on his words, just like this audience is. You want them to be able to relate to what you're saying. You do not want to instill fear or be so graphic that they can't bear to think about it. So I'm going to not pause, but I'm going to cover and give you some examples of ways to talk, or ways to begin thinking about how you can tell your story. So it's important to note that your story is unique. You are unique, and what happened to you is unique. But you don't want to focus too much on that while you're telling your story. You want to be universal. You want people to be able to see themselves in you. So I'll give you an example. I have some examples here. You wouldn't want to tell people that you were diagnosed at age 25 with the rarest form of bladder cancer and you had only a 3% chance of living. I mean, that's like a Hollywood story, even if it's true. you could frame it instead by saying, I was diagnosed at age 25, it was late-stage cancer, and even though the average age of diagnosis of this disease is 73, I'm living proof that bladder cancer can happen to anyone. So even though you might be very unique, you just want to find a way that people can hear what you're saying and relate it to their own lives. You want to focus on your human experience, and you want to skip jargon. I've noticed that when I start to talk to people who have been through bladder cancer, we slip into the jargon easily because now we know the terms. But your audience almost certainly won't. So if you tell people you've had 12 cystoscopies over 4 years and TURBs happened 18 times, they'll think, I don't know what she's talking about. But if you can tell them in a more general way, in a way that you get your experience across, you say, I undergo invasive tests often because there's a high recurrence rate. The constant testing caused a lot of anxiety, especially for my family. So if you're basically talking about the same thing in one way, you're focusing on your own experience and you're saying things that will be easier for people to relate to and understand. You don't want to be too graphic, and I'm going to go back to that earlier picture I showed you of the audience watching David speak, because one of the women at an earlier training said, should you really talk about this at lunchtime? And the answer is yes, but you want to be careful about it. So you don't want to be too graphic about the impacts of having your bladder removed, for instance. You won't want to describe the details, but you might want to say something general so people understand the impact of the disease. So I'll give you an example. You might say, I had bladder cancer removal. I had my bladder removed 3 years ago, and though I still have an active lifestyle, I have to think about things I never did before, like where the closest restroom is. So this gives a way for people to understand the impact of bladder cancer without making them go into too much detail in their heads, which they might not be able to handle right away. You'll be receiving a lot of facts in your educational materials, and feel free to insert these into your story. So your story is the important part, but sort of underscoring the prevalence of this disease. You can say 500,000 people are living with bladder cancer in the United States, 16,000 will die. These are powerful and useful to insert into your story. If you can, use humor. You don't want to get off track, and of course bladder cancer is very serious, but if you can break or add in a little humor at times, it can be a powerful way of helping your audience relate to you. And then we like you to end on a positive note because we want your audience to then take action. And the reality is bladder cancer can be a terrible experience. There can be terrible parts of it, and not everyone survives. So it's hard to make some situations positive. But I have an example. This is what someone said who had lost her mother. She said, I think about my mom every day. She was a true advocate. I think she would be proud to know that I'm here today to share her story. If I can help just one person get diagnosed early, I have made a difference. So this person is taking a tragic and very sad story, but she's making it positive, and she's honoring her mother, and she's making her audience feel like, yes, I understand, and it's important to do something about this. So you will have these notes in more detail in your handbook. I know I sound like a broken record, but so you'll be able to reflect on them when you're thinking about the aspects of your story that you want to tell.
Can you include some good bladder cancer jokes?
If you have them, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you have them?
What's that?
Do you have any good bladder cancer jokes?
I have any.
To include?
I'm going to have to add that to my list. The only thing I can think of is a pin that I saw from the San Francisco walk that says, oh, bladder cancer pisses me off.
I've got that. I have that bike shirt that has bladder cancer pisses me off on it.
You might. I was thinking, I don't know if you could wear it because it depends on the audience, but you might want to bring it.
Right.
I'm making a note, bladder cancer jokes. I have none off the top of my head, but I will throw that out there and see if anybody else knows any.
Thanks.
Okay, I just want to give you a few thoughts about preparing your story. You've already checked during your planning period about the setup, so when you practice your story, use the same setup. If you'll be standing up at a lectern, you can sort of rig a practice one up at home. You just want to be in the same environment as you practice, so you'll feel more prepared. You'll know the time that's allotted to you. So time your remarks and make your story fit. Don't make it too short or too long, and pace yourself, because sometimes when you're speaking in front of people, this doesn't happen to everyone, but I know that I start to speak really quickly, and then I end up being done before I plan to be. So that's something to be aware of. Give your speech to family and friends, or speech or talk, see what they think, and get their feedback. Again, you've done some research while you were talking to the event organizer, so you know what your audience is like. And your story is pretty big, but you will just pull the parts that you think will appeal most to the particular audience that you're going to be speaking to. And assuming there's time for you to answer questions, be prepared to answer questions, and you can even try shaping your story to receive the questions you want. Okay, I want to talk just this last section about the elements to include in your story. And this, again, I'm going to refer you to your handbook, but I'll give you some examples. Every story, you want a strong start, and there are some examples in your handbook. I'll just read one. You could start by saying, bladder cancer is the most common disease you've never heard of. It's just a thought, but you just want to think of a way to catch people's attention. In every talk, you want to end with a call to action. You want, as we were speaking earlier about staying positive or ending on a positive note, you want to move people. You want them to understand that what you're talking about is important, and then you want to give them something to do. And I'll read one example. There's more in your handbook, and of course you can think of your own experience and come up with one that makes sense to you. But here's an example. Take action today to be healthier. Stop smoking and lead an active lifestyle to reduce your risk of bladder cancer. And I'm sure you'll deliver it better than I did. But you want to leave people with thought in their heads about what they can do. Also, in your talk, go ahead.
Are there scientific data that says leading a healthier lifestyle decreases the incidence of bladder cancer?
We have a webinar on this, and you can reduce your risk. We don't know it causes cancer, so you can't say you can't eliminate your risk. But there are things that you can do to reduce it. And the webinar is called Debunking Nutrition Myths. And it covers not only nutrition but also lifestyle. So I think there's more research needed, but there are some things at least we know that we can do.
Yeah, I got to say, I think that leads people down a bad path. I spend a lot of time reading on Inspire, the BCAN Inspire site, a lot of unscientific stuff about cauliflower and other dietary modifications that people swear by, for which there's no data. And I don't think...
Okay. Well, I hear what you're saying, and then I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm thinking that I know that our executive director agrees with you, because she's talked about this before. Like, we really don't know what causes cancer, and we really can't say for sure. Nothing for sure will prevent you from getting it, but we do at least know the risks, and so we know how you can reduce the risks. And I guess I would ask because I know that both our executive director and our education manager are very data-driven, and they have the same concerns that you do, and they don't want to lead people astray. So I guess I would encourage you to see that webinar, and it's called Debunking Myths for a reason. It's because of those same concerns that you've outlined. But it appears that there are some things that may reduce your risk, and there's also clear that there's more research needed.
You know,
So
even smoking, I'm not sure if you're speaking to a crowd of 60-year-olds who have 30 pack years of smoking under their belt, that if they stop smoking now, there's a decreased incidence of bladder cancer for the rest of their lives. I don't think there's data on that either. You know,
yeah.
I'm happy for you to educate me otherwise, but to me, it's more the early detection is the call to action for people.
Okay. So maybe my example was not the greatest one. But,
I'm not criticizing you. I'm just concerned about not giving, steering people astray. That's all.
Okay. I mean, I think this proves or shows that it's important for you to think about what's most important to you. I'm going to double check the data on cigarette smoking, and it could be connected to age. I do know that it's the one thing that they recommend that people do is to stop smoking.
Well, certainly, you'll survive a radical cystoplasticectomy better if you don't smoke. But I'm not sure that it decreases people's incidence of cancer during the remaining 30 years that they have.
Okay, so that's something I'll have to, double check the best way to talk about. But I guess I'd refer you to that webinar just to see what you think about it, because I think they're very careful about saying what we know is true and what we don't know is true.
Okay.
But also, also I guess to double check your handbook about the different suggestions for a call to action. And I think even one of the things that I haven't gotten to yet, but I'm going to talk about, is that we need feedback from people in order to approve the program. So I think things like this are what will strengthen the materials we offer. So I will double check this and see a more precise way of talking about it, perhaps.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and this is our last slide on community educators, and then we have some wrap up. My community educators, this is a short slide, but that's because the presentation, Bladder Cancer 101, I've made a recording of it so you can listen to it in your own time rather than us going through it. So I thought it would be a little bit easier on your schedules. So it is a resource that we provide to you. It's the Bladder Cancer 101. It has a script and a recorded presentation, and that you can listen to and sort of shape your own from there. As with other Speakers Bureau events, you'd want to review the talking points, the frequently asked questions, the educational materials, so you feel prepared to answer questions. Definitely, you'll want to personalize the presentation. I mean, if you feel comfortable reading scripts, we've got one, but I think it will be more powerful if you put it in your own words. We wouldn't want you to change the facts, but if you could make it your own in the sense that it's your natural way of speaking about things. So there's a lot of room for you to personalize this and make it more powerful, especially by including your story, or if you haven't been impacted by bladder cancer, your motivation for being a community educator. So that can sort of reach people that way. And again, as with other speaking opportunities, you want to end on a positive note. And contact Beacon with questions. So I have actually several questions on my page right now that I have to ask people, ask Monica, I think, and then get back to people. But that's good, because that'll just make the program stronger.
Excuse me, I just looked up about smoking cessation and bladder cancer outcomes, and there is a favorable effect on decreasing. It decreases recurrence and decreases progression if you stop 10 or more years prior to the diagnosis. So I answered my question.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't have that. Okay. For people who are speakers, we've already covered answering questions. I just wanted to, there's a few challenges that you will have that people who are community connectors won't have. And in this picture, there's a ton of people who want to ask questions. But if you don't experience that, one thing or one technique is to let the silence stretch out, because if you let it stretch out, someone will ask a question to make it end. A lot of people don't like silence. There's also suggestions in your handbook for questions that you can use to prompt others to get questions started. Of course, don't be afraid to say that you don't know, and you can set boundaries when it comes to people asking you personal questions. You determine what's comfortable for you. So I'll wrap up with just summarizing some of the do's and don'ts. Please do share that you are a Beacon volunteer. You're not there as a medical professional. You want to smile, be welcoming, make eye contact. Make sure you dress for the occasion. Use Beacon materials as the basis for answering questions. And please take pictures so we can share them with others and hopefully attract more volunteers. And again, you can say, I don't know, and you can set boundaries. So please don't give medical advice or try to diagnose a clinical problem. Please don't recommend any particular procedure, test, or so forth. And sometimes people will ask you, but I would just refer them to the materials. This is, I know it's the experience that you have had may have been unpleasant, but try not to speak negatively or engage in criticism. Acronyms and jargon probably won't be understood by your audience. And we'll go to next steps. So I'm going to be emailing you all of these materials. First thing is to review them. Start looking for engagement opportunities. Turn in your volunteer application if you've never volunteered for Beacon before. And then finally provide feedback to us like Neil has done. This program is just getting started and will grow stronger based on the feedback of volunteers who are out in the field. So I've come to the end of the presentation. I just want to check and see if you have any questions.
Will you be sending us the volunteer application?
Yep, I'll be sending you the application and the volunteer handbook and the link to Bladder Cancer 101.
Great. Thank you. That was an excellent introduction or talk.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for your questions. Does anyone else have questions?
Is there any liability exposure to BCAN for what we do?
Well, we have a liability form in your application. The rest of the question, I think, if it gets more complicated than that, I'd have to refer to Monica. Okay, I'm sorry. Any other questions? I'm sorry. I'll try and find out more about that, Neil.
Okay.
I guess I have to.
Oh, go ahead.
If you're giving a community, if you're a community lecturer, do you have a PowerPoint presentation for us to use?
Yep. Right. I'm going to be sending you a recorded copy of the PowerPoint so you can review it, and I'm also going to be sending you the PowerPoint, which has a script, so you can follow or modify as you see fit.
Great.
And I think there was another question in there.
Gina, it's Krisha. I just want to say thank you, and I guess it's a lot to think about, and just set up some type of a plan on what I want to do, and just want to make a difference.
Yeah.
Do you have any volunteers in the other volunteers that are doing any type of speaking or whatever in the Charlotte area or South Carolina?
I can check our list. We might. It is a new program, so you would be one of the first volunteers.
Okay.
And I would also encourage you, to remember there are 3 ways to engage. So if you don't have to do speaking right away if that's not comfortable with you, if you'd rather start with a community connector. So if I know I covered a lot of information, and I don't want you to feel overwhelmed, so you can decide what's most comfortable for you. So I will check and see if there's anyone else on the list who's already trained who's in Charlotte, but
Okay.
I think you might be one of the first.
Okay, and I did want to make a comment that I think probably the first people that I would deal with would be my husband's physicians, because they were the ones that really encouraged us to use BCAN for information as a resource. And I think both the 2 that he really deals with are going to be pretty excited that there's someone in the area that can go and do presentations for them or to help them a little bit too. So
that would be great. And they might have more suggestions for you for different venues or places where you could go speak. That would be excellent. Okay, great.
Thank you.
What's your email address?
It's jmahoney at mahoney@bcan.org.
Okay, I'm going to send you that article on smoking cessation.
Okay, thank you. So any other questions?
Well, I'll see you at the think tank.
Unfortunately, I won't be there, but
okay. We won't then.
I'll hope to meet you one day.
Good.